I call the City of Newcastle Board of Adjustment meeting to order. Have the roll call, please.
Stevens Orr.
Assume Scarpetti.
Angel Ramos.
Valerie Leary.
Chris Rogers, City Planner. Max Walton.
It's me, Tinto, City Administrator.
Each application tonight is a separate public hearing. So I will read the first one. Okay. I'm gonna find it sometimes it's difficult. Yeah. An application has been filed by Ward and Taylor LLC, Ryan D. Journland Esquire, 55 West 8th Street, owner and applicant, for a property located in the DG zoning district at 428, 430, 432, 434, 438, 440, and 442 West 7th Street, Newcastle, Delaware, 19720. Tax parcel number 21-014.00-566 through 572. Seeking a special exception for the following use, church, as permitted as a special exception under City Code Section 230-21.1B, Section 2, following review and recommendation by the Planning Commission. Mr. Walton.
So, thank you, Madam Mayor and Madam Chair. I have given the board a memo, right before the hearing today, just to basically outline the standards for a special exception. With respect to the first application before you, there is, as it states, there's an application for a special exception, but there's also a request for variance that goes along with it. So we will go ahead and hear both of those. The applicant will speak. Then if there's folks from the public who want to speak, they'll get their 3 minutes apiece, as we do at all of our meetings. And following that, the applicant will have any rebuttal. I propose that we vote on that application, so it's over, and move on to the second application, if that works. Any member of the board have any questions?
No.
No.
Okay. All right, is the applicant here? Yes. You have the 30. Okay.
Ryan Jornland for St. Matthew's Church. So there was a planning commission hearing on the 26th of August. The commission recommended the special use exemption as a church in the downtown Gateway District. So we're seeking the approval of that today. Also seeking a variance for the distance for off-site parking. So I just want to go over the standards there and how the church meets those criteria. The church is reasonable, Harvest Christian Academy, where we are requesting the off-site parking to be approved, is reasonably close to the church. The church will also run 2 paratransit style buses that will go between the off-site parking and the church. Those will run continuously during masses. Also, a large percentage of the churchgoers are also expected to be foot traffic via the Jack Markell Trail that runs between the church and the off-site parking. Also, there is a bus stop right across the street, so many of the parishioners are expected to get off right there. As far as the agreement goes, Dr. Raymond Williams, who runs Harvest Christian Academy, has agreed to allow the church indefinitely to use parking in their lot. Also, the academy runs just during the weekday, so the church will be using it during the times when Harvest Christian Academy is not using the lot at all. As far as the requirements goes, for the number of spaces, the off-site parking on its own would be able to handle full parking for the church. It's proposed that the church will have 150 seats in its sanctuary, and with 5 seats required per parking space. that calls for 30 spaces. So there will be anywhere between 13 and 17 spaces on site. And then Harvest Christian Academy has availability for 41 spaces. Okay. And then as far as the walking distance goes, like I said, most of the parishioners will be bused between the two locations. But for the fourth requirement, we're seeking a variance that requires 1,200 feet, increased to 4,000 feet to allow that distance. The offsite parking is approximately 3,100 feet from the church.
I follow up with that. I'm going to interrupt you.
Sure, no problem.
So on the variance, what's the exceptional practical difficulty, if you could argue it to the board, just let them know what that is about the site?
The difficulty specifically as to
Well,
parking capacity.
Yeah, the parking capacity.
Sure. So it's the building, it's, you know, as you see, a few parcels. The building takes up, I believe, about 5,000 to 6,000 square feet. And, you know, there's some parking that's going to be primarily on the side. We just can't have too many parking spaces close to the street. But it only allows for about 13 to 17 on site. And approximately 30 is needed for what the size of the sanctuary will be.
And with respect to the special exception, I believe there's a letter that's part of the record that we've had a discussion regarding that. But there's some mention of a school use and all that. I just want to make it clear there's a Charlotte church use at this time.
Correct.
Depending on how that eventually comes to pass, we'll get that in site plan review.
Right, yeah, and we've clarified it's just ancillary use where the church is the primary use. Any, you know, I hesitate to call it daycare, but any childcare will just be during church hours. It won't be a commercial daycare. Essentially just church staff watching after children while their parents are in the service.
Now, I'm gonna ask you a few questions about
Sure.
what the standards are in the code, special exception. So I'm gonna start with, will you substantially injure or detract from the use of the neighboring properties or from the character of the neighborhood?
No, the site has been, you know, largely just empty for a large period. We believe it's in line with the DG district. It kind of, you know, increases the, you know, it's a contribution to the community as a whole. The look will be an improvement, so no, it won't detract in any way.
The board's required to consider the suitability of the property for the desired use to assure itself that the proposal is consistent with the spirit, purpose, and intent of the chapter of the comprehensive plan with relevant plans. Can you just address that really quickly?
Sure. There is, you know, other properties in the area that we believe is complementary to the church. There's some housing, some retail, I believe new retail and housing essentially across the street. So it will serve as, you know, a complementary use to the other buildings in the area and on that street.
I'm just going right down the code.
Sure, no problem.
Determine that the board's required to determine that the proposal will serve the best interests of the city, the convenience in the community, and the benefit the public welfare. Can you address that?
Yes, it is going to be used as a church, as we said, so we believe it contributes to the public welfare.
Okay. And it says, consider the effect of the proposal upon the public services and facilities such as water and public sewer, or public water, sewers, police, fire protection, and public school.
Yes, the church is aware that they will have to go to public utilities, Newcastle County, and get approval for sewer use, but it should not be a large impact.
And it says the board shall consider the probable effects upon highway traffic and pedestrian movement and assure adequate access and circulation arrangements in order to protect major roads from undue congestion and hazard.
Again, it's not a large church, about 5,000 to 6,000 square feet, and would be no more than, again, 13 to 17 spaces on site, pretty minimal.
The board is required to be guided in its decision by sound standards of subdivision and land development practice where applicable. Do you have anything to say on that?
Nothing else regarding that, no.
Okay. So I didn't know if any members of the board had questions.
How large is the congregation right now?
And the head pastor, Dr. Smith, is here. I think he can, if possible, speak to that. I don't know the total number. I know the church can fit 150, but I'm not sure the total. Dr. Smith, if you like, yeah.
I could hardly hear you. I apologize.
Okay.
Your
What size?
question was the amount of the congregation?
Yeah, what size is the congregation?
After the COVID hit, we really went down to a little or nothing. We just started the increase coming back. So we'll be way under the 150 to begin with. But the idea is that we probably will hold steady around 120.
Any other questions?
I have I don't have a problem with the church. I think that's a great addition to the area. I do have just some concerns about the minimal 13 to 17 parking spots on site, and I'm familiar with where Harvest Christian Academy is. Certainly not within walking distance of the church. And they're gonna be two paratransit style buses or shuttles that will shuttle people. Do you or does the pastor foresee anyone just kind of bypassing that and parking across the street and then trying to cross that road, which is dangerous, really,
Sure.
you know? On the weekends, it can be a very busy road, especially in the summertime. But because we have no off-street parking in that area.
Mhm. I think, so Dr. Smith's, does run a website. They have a Facebook page, so they do communicate, and regularly have contact online. So I think they have already been running these buses for a period. They already own them. They're already parked in Harvest Christian Academy. So the church is, aware that they're there. There's no charge. So I think there's no, nothing preventing them to take those.
Now, I did see an email from the director of Harvest Christian Academy. Are they here?
No, they're not here.
Okay.
Dr. Ray.
So I did see an email in our packet. But there's no legal agreement to this. This is just it's a handshake agreement. Is that the right terminology? Okay, it's a handshake agreement. So at any time, Harvest Christian, but not sure they would, but they can rescind this. So is there something else that can be done to make this more than a handshake agreement?
We can do that. We just went with the city's recommendation at this point, just to get a letter agreement. But Dr. Smith is also on the staff at Harvest Christian, so he has a long-term relationship with them, and if needed, we could get that.
Yeah, I think it would be in the best interest of the church as well, is to have a more legal agreement, because like I said, at any time they can withdraw this, and then the church is now looking for additional parking, and it could create issues in the area.
Sure. And there is another possibility. I know it wasn't proposed yet. Mr. Demondi has offered other parking in the area, so that would be another possibility, but at least for the proposed parking, that we could get an agreement for that.
Does anyone have questions or?
No, you're actually.
Ask them?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
So I neglected to mark the exhibits that we have, the notice,
sure.
posting, et cetera, from the mark that is A and B, and it'll be part of the record, okay?
Okay, great.
Do you have anything else? I'm gonna call it for public, anyone who wants to speak for or against your application?
Sure. That's it for us. We don't have to say anything.
Okay. So if anyone wants to speak either on behalf of or in opposition to, you can come up now. You have 3 minutes. You can make your presentation. Please state your name, it's flat.
You just did that for me, thank you. And actually, that brings up the point why I'm here tonight. I am for the church because there is a funeral home that has the same off-site parking agreement that the city allowed not too long ago. But my question is a procedural question, Mr. Maxwell. You are, according to ordinance 534, you are supposed to advise the board, not sit on the board. When I sit and I look at this board, it looks like there's 7 members. Mr. Rogers, yourself, even the city administrator, you're not members of the board. Why are you sitting there and why are you the one presenting evidence versus the chair of the board? And you asked most of the questions even before the board had a chance. When this ordinance was passed, I mean, I thought it was a dumb ordinance, to be very honest with you, but now it is the law in the town that this is a civilian board and you are a professional. And I'm just wondering why the mayor is not chairing the meeting and you are.
So it's about the application on the church. You have anything else to say?
That's it. Well, okay, then where would I address this? Okay, thank you, sir. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's ordinance 534.
I act as outside counsel across the state in a number of capacities for a number of different board of adjustments. Many times I am asked to deal with the procedural matters to make sure we have the record and we have the necessary things in the record. This is something I've done in jurisdiction. Tell you that they've seen me do it.
And sir, I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm not disagreeing with that, and why I still have my 3 minutes. I'm not disagreeing with that. But the city council of this town approved a different path.
We're not,
So
we're not.
fair enough. I understand. You can respond.
We're not here to argue about that.
I'm not arguing, I'm discussing.
I do not have a vote. I'm here to try to make sure that that we get the right stuff in the record and we do those things out. So
I think with your influence, all 4 of these people are very quiet. I've sat and watched the last few Board of Adjustment meetings, and you are the chair, just to make it perfectly clear.
With that said, is there anyone else here either for or against the application? Having no one, Mr. Joyland, do you have any final words?
Yes, sir.
All right. Unless somebody says anything, we're gonna close the public hearing in relation to this particular matter. And it'll be, so, speak now or forever hold your peace. All right, there we are. So with that, we're gonna close it. Madam Chair, there were gonna be 2 votes. One was going to be on the ordinance, or excuse me, on the special exception for the church use part. Second will be on the variance where we're gonna use the familiar quick check standards. We're gonna have at this time discussion. I would like to address one of the questions you raised, Madam Mayor. You may add as a condition, if you so desire, a condition that there be a legal agreement of some sort that guarantees for some period of time the ability to use the off-site parking. And make that a condition.
So we're gonna close the hearing right now, since there is no more comment. And we will open this up for any discussion. Starting with Mr. Zor, do you have any?
Well, I am concerned about the parking and the safety of it, but I think it's something the church needs to handle. But I just wonder if there's something the city could do with maybe crosswalks or something somewhere. Because I know even when I walk my dog, crossing the street around 7th Street and South Street is dangerous. You know, it's not easy to do that. And that even going across 7th Street, you know, by the liquor store there is not easy. So I'm thinking maybe the city needs to, I guess that's a state road. So maybe the state has to get involved with that. Because you can tell me all you want that no one's going to park across the street, but I think someone will. I really do, you know, and in anticipation, it should be just safe for anybody to cross at any time anyway. Right. So, you know, I'm okay. I'm good with the church and what they're intended to do, but I think you got to make contingencies for the possibility of someone not following what's instructed to do, because I can see someone's going to park eventually somewhere. So they're going to cross that street, even if they park down on 7th Street and walk up, you know, they'll be doing that. Right. So if we can somehow get the state or the city involved to make it a little safer for pedestrians.
So
think
that
would
the
help.
corners that are there, the churches in between Washington and Seventh and South and Seventh. So
Yeah,
if you put a crosswalk,
You got one in South and Seventh,
yeah, if
but
you
you
put a
don't have
crosswalk
one down the other way.
down at Washington and Seventh.
Well, I think you got one there. I think you got a crosswalk.
But if
there.
you tried to put a crosswalk, of course, this is Del Dot too, because it's a state road, so. If you put a crosswalk, you probably have to put some sort of
Well, I'm not saying we,
a light, flashing light or
So
something.
that's a little bit beyond.
That's beyond our scope.
yeah, it's beyond our scope. I'm just saying we should,
But that's
we
another
should
thing.
follow up with that, right? Yeah, I think that's, we see how, what happens, right? But I think the church, the people gotta be smart and do what they need to do. But I think I'm okay with the church. I just want to make sure that everybody's following the rules, right? And when they don't follow the rules, they don't endanger themselves or somebody else.
Excuse me, Madam Chair, remember this has to go through site plan process if it's approved tonight. So they will have to submit a full set of engineering plans to the planning commission for review and approval. And because there is an entrance onto Del Dot roadway, they will be involved in the review. Whether or not, it'll rise to the level of getting the crosswalk, I don't know, but I just want to assure you that there will be additional engineering review, on these plans. This is just for approval of the use and special exception. More detailed plans will be forthcoming.
Ms. Gerke?
I have nothing. It was more of a concern when it came to, because I'm very familiar with South and Seventh, as probably everybody in this room is, and it's a great place to go on a Friday night if you want to listen to a lot of people yell and scream at each other because of traffic. So it is a big concern when it comes to pedestrians at any given time walking. So of course, that's a huge concern. And I agree that something has to be done, because an email, although it's good for right now, is not sufficient
Yeah,
as far as an agreement. So, yeah,
when you make your motion, you can condition the motion and add that as a condition.
And should you do it for both Mr. DeMundi and the church? Or would you do that too, Mr.
You
DeMundi?
wanna hear from me?
No, just, would you do a legal
I
agreement?
lived in the street.
Well, I don't need to hear your thought. I just want to know, would you do a legal agreement that's similar to what we would do with the harvest school?
Mr. Ramos?
You guys have touched on my concerns, there's no need to repeat.
So the way this would work is that someone would need to make a motion. The motion should be in the affirmative, and it should add a condition as part of the motion. When I say the motion is affirmative, you go, motion to approve the special exception.
We're doing two separate ones.
So we're gonna do one of the special exceptions first. The variance.
And the attaching the condition is on the variance.
Yes, you can do that, yeah.
Right, do I have a motion to approve the special exception? There's my list here.
I make a motion to approve the special exception to allow a church to be built in the Gateway District.
Okay, all those, no, we don't do all
We got
those
it.
in
No,
favor.
we-
Sorry, we have to start down. That's Steve, you're always the
So we have a
first one.
motion and we have a
We
second.
have a motion and we have a second, and then we have to go instead of.
No, we gotta go
just-
through the special exemption.
Correct.
Instead of the quick, check, right?
Yes, on this one, yeah.
Okay. Oh, this might be a while. Okay. So we gotta go through A, which is considered suitability of the property for the desired, and use desired. Assure itself that the proposal is consistent with the spirit, purpose, and intent of this chapter, the comprehensive plan, and other relevant plans. Why do believe a church is consistent with the use of the property? There's very mixed uses all throughout there. Several businesses, several residents. We have 5 churches in town, several around town. So I believe that is definitely in the spirit of the area around it. So that reason for that. So I think that's A. Now for B, determine that the proposal will not substantially injure or detract from the use of the neighboring property or from the character of the neighborhood, and the use of the adjacent property is adequately safeguarded. So I believe this is a fine use of this property. It's not going to injure any of the neighbors. Mr. Bundy, you're one of the neighbors and you're selling the property. You don't have any problem with this going there. So I think from the character and the area, this fits perfectly. Okay. C, determine that the proposal will serve the best interests of the city, the convenience of the community, and benefit the public welfare. What can do that better than a church? So a church is absolutely a benefit to the community and to benefit the public welfare. D, consider the effect of the proposal upon the public services and facilities such as public water, sewers, police and fire protection, and public schools. I don't know if this has been reviewed, but I don't see the church as being a big drain on these public services and resources. I think they can accommodate that fine. I think that is not an issue. E, consider the probable effects on highway traffic, pedestrian movements, and ensure the adequate access and circulation arrangements in order to protect major roads from undue congestion and hazard. I don't think there's gonna be a problem with traffic in this area with regard to this. I think there will be some pedestrian movements that we need to be aware of and ensure they're adequately addressed. But I still think we're okay from that standpoint. B, be guided in decision by sound standards of subdivision and land development practice where applicable. Not really sure what that means, but I think dividing this is divided up into several lots, and you're combining into one lot, put a church on it and a parking lot, which I think is fine, and that's a sound decision. G, prescribe conditions and safeguards in addition to those otherwise required by the city code necessary to assure that the intent of this chapter is complied with, which conditions may include, but not limited to, harmonious design of buildings, planning, and its maintenance as sight and sound screen, the minimizing of noxious and offensive and hazardous elements, and adequate standards of parking, loading, and sanitation. From this standpoint, the church is a small entity. It's not this big project that's going there. There's not going to be a lot of trash. There's not going to be a ton of people. There'll be people walking. There's not going to be a ton of cars going around. It's not really going to adversely affect the area from hazardous elements and noxious nuisances. So based on those reasonings, I approve the special exemption to the Gateway District Code.
I agree, based on the reasons stated by Mr. Zeller.
Mr. Ellis?
I agree with the statements, said by Mr. Zilli.
And you incorporate those into your vote,
That is correct.
and you vote in the affirmative.
I vote in the affirmative.
I vote in the affirmative for the special exception with the reasons as stated by Mr. Zoll.
So now we need to move on. That adds.
Variance.
On the area variance for use of familiar basic quick text standards.
So, I would, when we come to this variance, I would like to, sorry, I didn't mean to turn my back to everyone, but I would like to condition it on a legal agreement with Harvest Christian.
We'll include Mr. DeMundi in the agreement.
And, I would like to include Mr. DeMundi in that agreement.
And I can hear you. You should have a sound in there, you have a microphone.
Okay, I would like to include your offer for your property for them to park on if necessary.
Permission.
No, we need to include it on a legal agreement, just like we're gonna ask Harvest
I'm sorry.
Christian.
Your attorney said that's all we needed was a letter saying that,
You make a condition,
yes.
they can make their
That's-
condition on the
Somebody told me
legal.
and I sent it.
Okay, we're making it a condition to make the agreement more binding, okay? So,
You have my correspondence saying I'm gonna give it and add it to the.
we have that from Christian Academy as well, but it's just an email, which is a handshake agreement. So we want
I
a
don't
more
wanna mess
legal.
things up, you know, let it-
No, okay. We're following you.
You have three churches here in town have no parking.
We're not
John,
making an issue
John,
about this, Mr. Mundy. We're not making an issue.
This person.
It's
Get
required.
what you want, John. Sit down.
You're getting-
Come on, John. John, have a seat.
That's the fact.
John,
I've seen three churches here that have no parking and they.
you identified that.
So if you made a motion, you make the motion in the affirmative, right? Motion to approve the variance on the condition that, that the church provide a binding legal agreement acceptable to the city, for the additional parking.
And do we include Mr. Demundy in that?
He said that was fine.
Okay, all right, so do we have a motion to approve the variance with the condition that Harvest Christian Academy and Mr. Demundy provide legal agreements for allowing parking
Acceptable to the city.
acceptable to the city?
I make a motion to accept.
I second.
We have a motion and a second.
We have a motion and a
Discussion.
second, and now do we have any additional discussion? And we have to go through a quick check, right?
That's correct. So, motion and a second.
Yep.
Call the roll call vote.
Let's start again, Steve. I'm sorry, you're sitting down there on the end.
All right, so the first quick check, right, is the nature of the zone which the property leans. Unique conditions of the land property that demonstrate the zone is not reasonable and applied to it. Well, the size of this lot is fairly small for putting a church on it. So I think that's the thing that makes the variance required. So, but I think their solution to have some satellite parking, some parking adjacent to it is sufficient and will satisfy the intent of the code. The next is the character of the immediate vicinity and uses contained therein. The town has a whole 5 churches. There's several others are outside of town. They're very common here. The immediate area is a just think a church will just add another different use to that mix. And I think that's satisfactory. I think that's fine. Whether if this restriction of the applicant's property were removed, such removal would seriously affect such neighboring properties and uses. With the mix of uses that are there already, I don't see how another use, and especially a church, would adversely affect the area. I do foresee possibly some issues where people would park where they shouldn't. I think that's a problem the church needs to address. Other than that, I agree that that's satisfied. And I think the practical difficulty of the property is to make a church the size that would be successful and also on that lot and they just can't provide the parking and have a church that's the size of what they want to be successful. So the practical difficulty is just the size of the lot to put the parking in with it. So with the satellite parking, I think that solves the issue and I think it'll be fine. And as far as we get the legal agreements for the additional parking, I think all those problems will be addressed. So from that standpoint, I vote in the affirmative.
I vote in the affirmative based on the reasons stated by Mr.
Do you
Chairman.
incorporate his reasons into the record through the?
I absolutely incorporate his reasons into the record.
I voted affirmative and I vote to, Mr. Zor's, comments and vote into the record.
Yep. Become part of your vote.
That's part of my vote.
And I vote in the affirmative according to Mr. Zora's commentary and vote into the record as well.
So we have.
Yeah.
The variance passed, the special exception passed to the applicant. But the variance, that's not, and the special exception, I'm gonna give you a written decision, to put that out as quickly as we can. I'm not very fast with it. So you have to give me a week or two. That is not final until that written decision is filed in the office of the Board of Adjustment. Got to go out test. When the file, anyone who wants to challenge has 30 days to make that challenge. That's on you, but otherwise, everything will go through with it. As quickly as you can. Okay? And then while you guys are setting up, I need to talk to you.
So we'll take a 5-minute break for the next hearing to set up. And Is, everything set up over there?
Looks like we're getting there.
Okay, I'll let you use that there once.
Okay, very good, very good.
All right. We're gonna have our next application here in front of the Board of Adjustment, and let me read this. An application has been filed by Freedom Development, J.H. Fisher, Inc., owner and applicant, for a property located in the DG zoning district at 610 West 7th Street. Excuse me. And 700 Larkin Street, Newcastle, Delaware, 19720. Tax parcel number 21-014.00-132 and 21-017.00-127. Seeking a special use exception for the following use: construct residential apartments as permitted as a special exception under City Code Section 230-21.1 B, Section 2, following review and recommendation by the Planning Commission.
So, Madam Chair, I'm going to move into the record just so I can do this hopefully before, but I have the newspaper publication, the posting about the exhibits A and B. And then we'll be part of the record. Again, this is a special exception, so we have these special exception criteria that we need to follow. And we're gonna do it exactly the same way. Applicant's gonna give their presentation, public is gonna give it their. 3 minutes to get an opportunity for rebuttal if necessary. We're gonna try to keep this as short as we possibly can. And then you'll get the rebuttal and the board will have the opportunity to do this thing, so.
Thank you, council, and thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the Board of Adjustment. I want to thank you all for your time tonight. I do appreciate that it's a Monday and it's a Monday evening, and we all have lives outside here I'm sure we would like to move on with. I am burdened, however, with checking off the factors in your code, certainly, and I appreciate you bearing with me on that. And I, unfortunately, on my client, have a few extra ones that the last applicant did not have because of the type of application in front of you. Yes, it is a special exception, but there are some additional factors we're required to touch on. We did prepare a PowerPoint. I know it's lengthy. I will move through it briskly, and I have some witnesses that I need to put on to create what I think is a proper record under the standards. So I appreciate you bearing with us this evening. Here with me, and just for the record, my client is Freedom Development LLC, who is the developer. Here with me is my representative of my client, John Jaffe. Thomas McKenna is here from Menarden. Mark Ziegler from McBride and Ziegler. Our traffic engineer, because the traffic study was a condition of the Planning Commission's approval. Our traffic planner is here, Nicole Klein from McMahon, a Bowen company. Our environmental engineer is Douglas Seavey. However, he's with Landmark. However, we found out late this afternoon he has COVID. And unfortunately,
Thank you for leaving him out.
yes, I think that was a good call. And unfortunately, apparently his whole office, they had an event and most of the office at Landmark has it, I'm told. And I understand our well-known license and inspection city representative Jeff Bergstrom also may have COVID, I heard today. So we should wish him well, as well as the others. So we do have a statement that he was kind enough to type on some of the environmental issues that we addressed in front of the Planning Commission. My client, Mr. Jaffe, is going to read that into the record because he's been involved in obtaining the environmental approvals from DNREC and is still efforting that cause. However, if there's any point where the board would like to hear directly from our expert, we certainly would ask that you would consider tabling and we can come back. I don't know that that will be necessary, but I wanted to, it's a matter of housekeeping, bring that up because we certainly wouldn't want his absence to compromise the application. We think we could certainly accept the testimony of Mr. Jaffe based on Mr. Walton's advice on accepting such hearsay, which is permissible. But if there is any concern, we certainly could come back and complete our hearing with our expert in tow when he's feeling better. Landscape engineer is also here, Barry Burcham. And I think we've now gotten everybody, so I will try to move along, as I said, briskly. There is a concept here that's been prepared by Bernardin of a breakout of the site, and I will circle back to this, but I want to start off with a pretty picture because I think it is a pretty picture. This property, I'm very familiar with. When my wife and I, then fiance, lived in Old Newcastle while I was in school. This site, I think dates back decades and truly cries out for redevelopment. And this is an old site in the city. It was used during an industrial era that has since long gone, but it has cried out for redevelopment for many decades. What has been missing is a developer who's willing to step up and spend the money and invest in the city and the site. My client is prepared to do that. It also represents, I think, another good example of providing some more affordability in Old Newcastle through apartments. Yes, there are expensive apartments in this area, but they're certainly more cost effective than perhaps single family or twins or even towns. Certainly, when we lived in Mr. Toner's house on 144 East 3rd Street, one of his rentals, and decided to move out because it was the size of a shoebox on the top floor. We couldn't find anything, my wife and I. We would have liked to stay in Old Newcastle. We love the city. We come here quite a bit and enjoy all that you offer, but we could not afford anything that was available at that time. And certainly the influx of some more apartments into the outer areas and perimeters of the town, I think, has offered a nice opportunity for those who've not had that opportunity in the past. Next slide, please. And that's okay. That's fine. So here is just an aerial overview of the property. It's approximately 16.6 acres. It's made up of 2 parcels that would be combined as part of this application. Next slide, please. And this is just another view of it. Off a parcel view, and you see the one piece ending in 127 is 1.49 acres, and then the larger piece is 15.16. This is a brownfield cleanup site. And as you may all be aware, it is the redevelopment that is the spark that provides the money and the funding for the cleanup of sites such as this. This is a pretty recent aerial, and it really gives you an idea of the condition of the site. Again, I would respectfully submit, cries out for redevelopment, and it has for decades. Next slide, please. Just to give you a sense of the character of the area, this is the west side of the parcel, just to give you an idea of what's around us today and the character of the area. Next slide, please. It's another angle further down Clark Street. So you'll see what we'll be abutting up to on one side. And that's still the west side of the parcel. And I'm going to apologize, this laser is not the greatest on this type of screen, but you can perhaps see a little bit of it reflecting there. You see this 100-foot buffer area that is offered on that west side to that corner we showed.
We can't see it. Can you point?
Yeah,
Your finger.
yeah, sure. Thank you.
You want to pan?
I could barely see it. No, this will work. Thank you, Mayor. So here's the 100-foot buffer area I was referencing on this slide. That is that west corner. And that's in part due to a ditch that runs and meanders through this area, but that will be a preserved area with the layout that you're seeing here. So a very nice buffer against that residential and quite a bit of open space as well throughout the layout and the design. What I'd like to do is have Mr. McKenna come up for a moment and just walk you through his design here with these apartments to give you an idea of the parking as well as the green space and what the goal was here in this layout and how he's designed it to be sensitive to the surrounding area and the needs of the city. And if you can kind of visualize that in combination with his 3D renderings, and he's gonna hand them out. He's got 5 additional ones that are 8.5 by 15 this year.
Mark that as exhibit C, Sean.
Certainly, thank you.
So yeah, my name is Thomas McKenna. I'm from I'm a senior project director at Bernardin, the Vision of Core States group. Our company is very sensitive to the existing downtown and making a connection to that based on the number of projects we've done in the past. I'm going to hopefully demonstrate that the layout and the design of the buildings is in accordance with the downtown Gateway District and connects with the city as well as the existing neighborhood. With our building character, there's 10 buildings. There are 10 buildings, with 3 of them being 4 stories at the perimeter, outside perimeters, and the other 7 are 3 stories that are fronting 7th Street. The materials are brick and vinyl siding and shingled roof. The existing multifamily properties in the neighborhood, including the Garrison Apartments, there's 4 buildings there, 4 stories, and the DeMar Landings, there's 3 stories and 1 6-story building, and they all use similar materials with the brick siding and the shingle roof. The front and rear of the buildings are identical, as we have front and the rear are identical, and with main entries through these open covered walkways. Our 2 buildings that are on 7th Street all front 7, so you can make your entries through the covered entries there. Our windows are typical residential scale. We align vertically from 1st floor up through 3rd or 4th floor, which is typical of residential design in the area. Roofs, again, we are a gabled roof with a shingled roof, with also a gabled dormer that projects over the balcony. With our facade articulation, we have a horizontal cornice trim that's at the roof and also around different floor levels. We have vertical articulation at these covered balconies that project out and kind of break up the massing. We are required to have an 18-inch minimum masonry water table, which we have just at the side elevation at the little mechanical portions of the unit. But for the most part, we have 1 or 2 stories of brick and mixing it with the siding above. There's 10 buildings are enough room for 396 apartments, with each of the 7-story building, each of the 3-story buildings having 36 units and 4 stories having 48 units. There are 264 1-bedroom apartments and 132 2-bedroom apartments mixed throughout the whole building. We're accommodating 594 parking spaces, which is also the minimum required.
Mr. McKenna, could you tell us a little bit about the thought behind where the parking is located on this site, internal, and why that is?
Yeah, we didn't want to have any of the parking along 7th Street. We want to have it internal, as you said. It is aligning with the front or rear of the buildings, so that again makes easier access into the units. We also have a 1-story community center which would, again, has a gabled roof and similar materials to the rest of the building.
And also there is I believe a small commercial component designated in size for this property.
Yes, we have the ability to add retail at the end of one of the first story or one of the front buildings along 7th Street. And that would actually reduce the number of apartments by approximately 2 units.
And what is the maximum height here, sir?
Yeah.
Okay, we're not exceeding that in your.
No, we're below that, yes.
And my notes indicate that we're approximately 56% impervious cover. Does that sound about right, sir?
That sounds about right.
I'm just double checking that you met, spoke briefly about the standards in the code. I think you hit them all. Anything else you'd like to offer? This time I can call you back up.
Yes.
I'd like to, hold on, I made a mistake. I should have sworn you before you started.
Okay.
So Mayor, you wanna swear to me? All right, can you raise your right hand? You swear that the testimony that you have provided is the truth and this matter?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I made it.
Thank you. I
Just
kind of-
a curiosity.
Yes, ma'am.
That's all. What is the square footage of the 1 bedroom and 2 bedroom apartment? Just curious.
One bedroom's about 777 square feet, and the 2 bedroom is 1,087 square feet.
And if I may supplement that, Mayor, by offering that one of the conditions of the planning commissions was that we consider affordability. Certainly, we're trying to balance affordability with the cost of the materials and other things the town would like to see in its code. But certainly the different bedroom sizes help provide a better range of affordability. We do still have an evolving market in terms of cost of materials, so it is still in flux right now, and my client testifies. I think he'll certainly share that. So we do not have price points pinned down just yet, but we do have a site plan review process that's going to take some time, just like the last applicant. And that certainly will wash its way out as the economy evolves and inflation evolves, and hopefully slows down a little bit more.
Well, affordability means one thing to one person and something to someone else.
Agreed.
Because my mortgage is less than any of the apartments around here, which is, so.
Next slide, please. So we talked a little bit about just the commercial. This is a bit smaller than what we had presented to the planning commission. This would be one of the end caps on the apartment buildings that front 7th Street, also sometimes referred to as Route 9. As you all probably know, the Garrison has quite a bit of commercial on the first floor. It has been a challenge, as I'm sure you also know, to lease that. We do have a broker, Bill Gangs, who he is here, who will offer some brief testimony on that. He testified in front of the planning commission. That is a challenge. You need foot traffic for that, not to steal his thunder, but you need foot traffic for that, as you'll hear. And certainly this project will help provide some foot traffic for the Garrison and hopefully result in some more of those units being occupied in the future. But as we have seen over the past couple of years, I think it's been a couple of years, the rental actually going in the opposite direction. I think there was actually one more unit rented there about a year and a half ago. We were in front of the planning commission. So potential users, but we don't believe the market will support more commercial of any significance in that area at this time. But we did want to show some, because on the comp plan, this is a designated mixed use. And we want to be certainly consistent with your comp plan. So we show a modest amount. This is a bit smaller than what we had shown the planning commission. Next slide, please. And here's the Garrison I was just mentioning. The deli is certainly still there, and I think the rental office. Next slide. And that's the unfortunate vacancy situation that
The deli does really well.
I bet it does. I bet it does. That's certainly a good stop point. Even if you're at Battery Park, it'd be a good stop point to come out and visit. Next slide, please. And again, for the character, we're talking about the character of the area. And you heard our architect talk about that. This, of course, is 6 stories. This is higher than us. This actually did receive a variance to get that additional height. I believe Mr. Harker was on the Board of Adjustment at that time, if memory serves. But that is one apartment complex in the area. Also now under the comp plans, mixed use zoning. Next slide, please. And there it is on the comp plan with the blue, which designates mixed use. Next slide, please. And of course, the Garrison we were just talking about. And also currently designated on your comprehensive plan for mixed use, just as we are. So we are being thoughtful about what has already been built around us, and we are efforting to be consistent with that character and the nature of those existing projects. Next slide, please. This is same as what you have there to your left, but just a little bit better view shed on a big screen TV to see I would suggest there's some thoughtfulness that went into the design, breaking up what is often seen as monotony in apartment complexes that are boxes. This is not your typical box. You see the roof line articulation. You often see that with townhomes to break them up. You see them here with this apartment design. Not often do you see that with apartments. And you also see obviously the facades that our architect talked about as well, and the peaks. Again, an effort to break it up and to individualize it a little bit more than the boxy look that we often see with apartments. Next slide, please. And here's the breakdown. Our architect walked you through in terms of 1 bedroom, 2, and the number of parking spots, which are code compliant. We are not seeking variances here. We're only seeking a special exception. Next slide, please. If I could just back up for 1 moment, I'm sorry. My apologies. The 396 units. Let me give you a little context for where that came from. When we first appeared in front of the Planning Commission, we were on the heels of another application actually came in front of this board. Mr. Zorner may remember the Velaskakis application. And one of the things that the members of the board at that time, different members, some of them, certainly some new faces here tonight, had mentioned was that your zoning code does not place a specific density or unit limit when you're doing multifamily development. It is silent in that regard, and I think that was a bit of frustration, if I recall correctly, for the board. Now here we are a year and a half later, and we're still in that situation. What the board at that point in time proffered was, 20 to 24 units for that particular project, which turned out overall to be about 23.3 units per acre for the Velaskakis application. Similar application, smaller site, similar application in the sense of downtown gateway and the proposed use. So what we decided to do, what we recommended to our client who's sitting here is that, look, we've heard from the Board of Adjustment at that time. We didn't think it would take us a year and a half to get back in front of all of you. It's not a criticism, it's just where we are today, and we accept that. But we decided it made sense very early on to follow that decision because it was the closest we had to what we believe the city was looking for in terms of density, because your code is silent. I would make the case to you, and I think I may have at that time, that other codes are also in a lot of ways silent that I've seen on the multifamily. For example, Newcastle County regulates multifamily in a mixed use context with a total square footage, not a unit count. And I'm not aware of any client who's been able to meet the maximum for the residential in Newcastle County. So I have seen codes, Newcastle County being the one that I'm most familiar with, that really don't set a cap. It's more what you can fit within the box of the height and the setbacks and the buffers. But in this case, again, we heard what the board said a year and a half ago, and we decided to use that as a benchmark. So if you're wondering where the 396 came from, it was based on what we had heard from this group a year and a half ago. We thought that made as much sense as any other place to start. I also attached, just for the record, a copy of that decision in a material that was delivered today, just so you have that for the record. Next slide, please. All right, landscaping. I'm going to ask in the interest of time, I'm going to ask Mr. Bertram to come on up, Harry Bertram, to introduce himself and talk you through a little bit about his landscaping plan.
Are you coming over, you want to speak from there or?
Where are you gonna do it? Oh.
I think he's trying to swear himself in, but he's a little awkward.
Okay.
Thank you, Gary.
If you'll raise your right hand and do you agree that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. Good evening, my name is Gary Burcham. I'm a landscape architect here in Wilmington, Delaware. I've been here practiced 40 years or thereabouts. This is a code compliant landscape plan. It complies with the downtown gateway district requirements and the parking standards for the city of Newcastle. In terms of the points that are required in the downtown gateway district, it's a little bit nebulous, your ordinance, but I understand exactly what you're after. It's you have a great town here with great streetscapes, and that's what you're trying to perpetrate. And so your ordinance says, create a pedestrian-oriented neighborhood commercial district that enhances the aesthetic appearance of streets, parking lots, and other pedestrian areas. And that's what this entire project is aimed at doing. If you look at the streetscape that we have along West 7th Street, you'll see that there's a number of street trees that are incorporated into this.
And excuse me, Gary, just for convenience, could you advance to the next slide, please? It'll zoom in on.
Oh, actually,
exactly
I would like to go back one slide.
I stand corrected. I stand corrected. My apologies.
How's that?
No, back again. One that shows that aerial, another one. Yes, this one.
Gary's really hijacking it now.
Yes. So this, as you can see, these are very attractive buildings that Bernardin has designed here. And the structures themselves create a definition to the street. But what you're not seeing here is the actual street trees and landscaping that would go with it. And that's of necessity because this is meant to show you the buildings and not necessarily the landscaping. So we can proceed now, the other two. Okay, so here's what we have along 7th Street. We have the buildings, which, as I said, create the definition of the street, along with street trees that are amply distributed along there at the required 40 feet on center or less. We have landscaping that is surrounding the building and intended to complement the architecture to the sides where it would be visible and along the front. What these buildings also do is they screen the entire parking lot. From the sidewalk along here, the parking lot is set back a minimum of 90 feet from the sidewalk. And where we don't have the building providing screening, we have evergreen screening plantings that are parallel to the backside of the parking lot. Street trees continue into the site. They're provided along Larkin Street. And if we can go back just one slide, along here, where that buffer yard is, that Sean told you about some time ago, that's already got a number of trees in it and some dense planting. I do not have that labeled on this plan, however. Now, if we just stay with this, you can see how the parking lot is articulated with trees throughout, and the requirement for 594 parking spaces is that you have one tree per every 5 parking spots, which requires a total of 119 trees, and what I've shown here is 120. So the overall plan, as I said, is in compliance with the requirements.
of the district and the parking standards. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
I don't think this falls under your section, but I noticed there's no playground or anything for the kids unless, it's in tiny print and you can't see that.
No, I did not.
No, there's nothing offered in the open space. There's some concern about that. You know, Battery Park is a relatively short distance away, but your point's well taken there. There is a community area, a meeting area that does have space around it, but there's no
Community center is right there.
no play equipment at this time.
Your older kids are the ones you would allow to go down the Battery Park out there. Your younger ones, you
Yeah.
would want something.
With parents certainly in tow, but your point is well taken. Thank you, Mr. Bertram. Look, Mr. Bertram will be staying, of course, if there's further questions. Next slide, please. Again, I'll move on. I'm sorry to kind of hustle, but I know time is sensitive. So I'm gonna move through these more quickly, I promise, because we've touched on some of these legal standards, but just to run through them, and if you could please keep clicking through them. These are just the code sections, which are, of course, very important, that are in B2 of 23057, suitability of property for the use desired, consistent with the spirit, purpose, and intent of the chapter in the comp plan, which Mr. Walden mentioned in the prior application. Project would not substantially injure or detract from use of the neighborhood property or from the character of the neighborhood or adjacent properties, and ensure adjacent properties are adequately safeguarded. Determine that the proposal will serve the best interests of the city, the convenience of the community, and the benefit of public welfare. Consider the effect of the proposal on public services and facilities such as public water, sewer, police and fire protection, public schools. Consider the probable effects on highway traffic and pedestrian movements, and assure adequate access and circulation arrangements in order to protect major roads from undue congestion and hazard. I'll go in reverse order, if I may. We do have our traffic engineer, Nicole Klein. I'm going to bring up to testify about the traffic study that was done. I'm happy to say it met all of DelDOT standards. That was a condition of the Planning Commission, by the way, that we perform a full traffic study. It was done. I'll let her respond to any questions. But we went beyond the traffic study. When we met with the chief of police, which I did about a year and a half ago, what we heard from him loud and clear was that there's a problem with flooding on Route 9 that has on occasion caused a backup of traffic up Route 7 or Route 9, whichever you want to call it, into the more inner part of the city. We have voluntarily offered to put in flood signage at ideal locations before people become committed to a dead end that's flooded, so that they can make different choices and go in different directions. And I have a slide on that I'll share with you. So I think the key takeaways that you'll hear tonight are traffic study, past standards, DelDOT standards, which were applicable, and we went further and did some signage that we're proposing to fix an existing problem that we certainly did not create, so that we can help the chief avoid those kind of backups in the future into the town. It would be automated. It can be controlled by emergency services through text, electronics. I'll let Nicole explain that in more detail because I won't do it justice. So we'll have her come up in just a moment and talk about that a little bit. The effect on public services and facilities. We did not only meet with the chief, but we met with Chief of Goodwill Fire Company. That was about a year and a half ago as well, before we went to the Planning Commission, actually. Wasn't anything unusual that he offered in terms of concerns. Obviously, they're servicing the apartments that exist in this area today, but he may certainly have and will have additional review as part of the site plan process, and sprinklers and other safety designs that are required from an architectural standpoint will be incorporated. Will be hopefully reach that as a place. Yes.
Did they say anything about additional, I read something about another access for emergency access, possibly like emergency vehicles or something, because there's only one in and out, right?
Yeah.
There is one in and out, and I'm trying to remember in the plus comment. I'll take a look at that as we continue on, if there was something else about that. And I'll challenge Mr. Ziegler to see if there's an emergency way out that we might be able to propose if there's not something in the plan already. Okay. I'll have him offer testimony on that. Thank you, Mr. Ziegler. For C, and I would say this overlaps a little bit with A and B. Certainly this is an area that's been crying out for redevelopment for some time. We're addressing that. That is a comprehensive plan goal as well. The comp plan is calling for mixed use. We're also, certainly following the comp plan and the map as well that we showed on the screen. And you've seen the landscaping offered to help safeguard neighboring properties, with the landscaping to help provide a buffer. So we're trying to follow each section of your code. It is written broadly, and a lot of codes are, but we're doing our best to hang use an analogy, Christmas balls on the tree as we go through this. This is the same presentation for the most part we did in front of the planning commission. What you're seeing is probably 98% consistent with what we presented to the planning commission. We certainly have some updated information in this version, however. Next slide, please. And now, because of the gateway, there's some additional standards. As I mentioned, there are many. But you see this overlap a little bit with the other section on special exceptions. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. That's okay. Thank you. And this goes back to 2020. So just to quote a few goals and strategies right out of your comp plan: incentivize private investment in Newcastle's remaining undeveloped parcels, brownfields, and redevelopment areas, harmoniously with nearby land uses, economic development. Former industrial sites and other brownfields represent development opportunities and should be brought back into productive reuse. Look to directly from your comp planning quotes. Next slide, please. Here's the map, again, just reiterating that we do have that mixed use designation like the other two apartment complexes in the area. Next slide. And then again, I apologize, but there are, like, we want to hang the balls on the Christmas tree here, use that analogy again. Create a pedestrian oriented neighborhood, extend the build form, character, and scale of the historic district. And I'll let our architect talk a little bit more on that, just to check those boxes, the build form and character. We're not truly in what I think you would typically consider a historic district in Newcastle, right?
Yeah.
We're outside of it, but that is the standard in the code that's mentioned. So we just want to talk about it. Next slide, please. You see this again, this reference to building design, consolidation of parcels. We're doing that. There's two parcels, we're going to one. Driveways, you will see in a couple more slides how we're actually closing one existing access. It doesn't mean it can't perhaps be used for emergency purposes, but that is one of the comp plan goals. Efficient access, encouraging shared parking. Enhance the aesthetics. You heard Mr. Gary Bertram talk about that, and improve pedestrian environment along the street, parking lots, and other pedestrian areas. And I'll show you some quick slides on that. Next slide, please. Okay. This is that community center that's blown up a little bit, 2,400 square feet, 10-foot sidewalks along 7th Street. We also, at the time of the planning commission, were looking into possibly an additional pedestrian crossover. There are two today. There's one right at the foot of where 141 dead ends into Route 9. And there is actually one just south of this site where you've got those traffic calming measures that were recently installed along Route 9 at Dobbinsville. However, I'll let Nicole talk about whether there might be an opportunity for another crosswalk to be added directly in front of this property. Next slide, please. Regarding the build form, character, scale of the historic district, we'll meet the downtown gateway standards, and I'll let our landscape architect come back up and just briefly touch on that. I think he's already covered them, but just to explain what a build form means, because I didn't know, and I asked him to sort of help me through that as an architect. Landscaping and lighting is consistent with the character of the district. And with the community center, that we're offering, we're trying our best to check off number 3, in terms of, community building and design. The mix of uses, again, we're making a modest effort at the commercial, but we generally don't think the market is there to go beyond what we're proposing because of what you're seeing with the Garrison. The next slide, please. This slide is intended to give you an idea of the sidewalk connections, internal, as well as those that will front Route 9, and also known as 7th Street. These are all highlighted in blue, show that internal connection and connection out to the sidewalk along 7th Street. Next slide, please. And again, there are a lot of standards, and I apologize to keep bringing these up, but I want to make sure I'm creating a complete record, or creating a complete record, excuse me. Mr. Kenna, if I can just bring up, this might be a good time just to plug you back in, sir. So Mr. Walton is comfortable, we're touching all the standards.
Sure. The 5 standards from the Downtown Gateway District was building character, building orientation, windows. The next slide is roofs and the facade articulation. I mentioned the building character, how we're meeting with the standards by using a mix of 3- and 4-story buildings. The materials with the brick, siding, shingle, roofs. And also characteristics of apartment buildings. Orientation, we're in front of the buildings. The first 2 buildings are located directly on 7th Street. We have 1 building located on Larkin. The entries are off roadways from the front or rear of the building, which we're symmetrical. The windows are at a residential scale, typical residential scale. Lights in the vertical articulation alignment. We would be using clear glass. We're not using the black or smoke glass. Important in the standards. You can go to the next slide. Yeah, for the roof design, we are using the gables. Even our 1-story building for the community center is not a flat roof that was prohibited. We would be using gable roof there. Again, with facade articulation, we have a horizontal line work through the trim of the cornices and the floor levels. The verticality is broken up with the projection, balconies, and patio, and also the covered walkways through here as well.
Okay, and to just summarize, you have reviewed the 230 standards for some time now, is that correct?
Yes.
And are you satisfied as the architect that you've made an effort to address each one of them in some degree or another?
Yes.
Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay. I mentioned the consolidation of parcels. Next slide, please. Now, this Larkin Street is proposed to be closed as part of this application to minimize the number of curb cuts, which is a comp plan goal, but certainly could serve as emergency access to some degree. And I'll let Mr. Ziegler touch on that. So sometimes there's competing goals, but in fact, I might let Mr. Ziegler come up now, since he's had a moment to look at that issue of emergency access to see if he can offer some suggestions in that regard. Mr. Ziegler,
Actually, Sean would have to maybe cut.
would you like to bring your,
There we are.
would you like me to grab your plan?
No, I'm all right. You're right. Okay. That street can stay open.
Yes.
Please raise your right hand. Do you agree that the testimony you're about to present is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. So as far as emergency access is concerned, right here is Larkin Street. And there are currently 3 buildings that were previously serviced by Larkin Street on Eric's property. I believe that street is to remain open so that we have a curb cut or we have a parking area behind the first building, and I could pull up the site plan. Or should I just grab it here?
It might be better to use the hard copy. Thank you, Mr. President. Maybe if you could just stand in front of the board, I think it might be easier for them to see, maybe here.
So essentially, right behind this building right here, this building facing, Route 9. There's a parking area that we can connect into Larkin Street, so that could provide the secondary emergency access.
There's only one entrance in and out, and there's 396 apartments. That screams back up to me. Now, you wouldn't necessarily want people coming out of Larkin there because now you have two exits onto an already busy street. But I'm a paramedic in my regular job, and I know that emergency access or some other access, and perhaps the fire chief or the police spoke with you about a secondary access as well.
Delmont, I believe, did, and it might be a good time just to have a complete record on that, to invite Ms. Klein up. We can try doing this with two consultants at once, perhaps, to talk about that issue and why that is currently proposed to be closed. But I don't think our client would have any objection to it being open, as long as Delmont would issue the letter of no objection, certainly, that we all would need to proceed forward.
Ms. Klein, did you raise your right hand? Do you agree that testimony you're about to give is truth, whole truth, nothing but?
I do. So DelDOT has not commented, at least in their traffic review, on the need for additional access points. But I do think and agree that in terms of, you know, a full-time access, I think it's better to have it closed and only used this additional connection for emergencies only. But it does provide that benefit. Certainly, if you have an emergency on site, you want to be able to, in a managed fashion, get people out or get people in, depending on what the situation is. And so I think that's a very logical connection, but for an emergency access only.
Yeah, I'm not sure if the best is a locked gate or an electronic, where they would have just a push button and a gate spins open.
Yeah, it could potentially just be a simple bollard with chains. It's, you know, because it would be expected to be used on a very limited basis. Sometimes you put in those electronic devices and if they aren't used often, that can be problematic. But I think there are a number of different measures that could be, you know, implemented.
Thank you, Mr. Ziegler. And since you're here, I'm going to try a backflip here and segue you into summary form. The traffic analysis that was done, DelDOT's written response to that and where you landed on that. And then I'll bring up the signage that we're proposing as well.
Sure. So I do think we have a slide before the signage that speaks to traffic. So
We do. That is going to be.
I'm not sure that we're there yet.
Yep, I'm gonna jump ahead to that just for time concerns. That is gonna be slide number 38. There we go. Thank you.
All right. Just back one. Thank you. So in summary, this project, because it does take entrance to a state roadway, 7th Street or Route 9, we are required by DelDOT to complete a traffic impact study. The city doesn't have a requirement, but we were committed to complete that traffic study in meeting with the Planning Commission. And so we proceeded through that process. It began with a scoping meeting that we scheduled with DelDOT, that the city planner and traffic staff from his office participated in. And then what was determined at that scoping meeting was the area that we needed to study, the area that we needed to include within our traffic impact study. So there were about 5 intersections, I believe, that surround the site that we were required to complete existing traffic counts and then do projected traffic analysis with the addition of area projects, general levels of expected traffic growth, and trips to be generated by this project. When we generated the trips for this project, we do break it down by 2-bedroom units versus 1-bedroom units, because as you can expect, you would anticipate different levels of drivers to be within a 2-bedroom unit versus a 1-bedroom unit. So we account for all of that. We also very conservatively accounted for some trip generation for the community center, even though it really would be internal. And also we incorporated some retail space into our assumptions. So we went through that process. It's very detailed. DelDOT reviews every step. They review our counts. They review our traffic projections for what we are demonstrating are the anticipated future conditions. And then they review in detail all of our analysis results. At the conclusion of that process, DelDOT issues a review letter, which includes recommendations. So essentially, that's the roadmap for what needs to be incorporated with the project. First and foremost, the results of the traffic study from the perspective of the off-site intersections, everything passed DelDOT standards. So there weren't off-site intersection improvements that are required by DelDOT. So we're really focused on the site. Obviously, the entrance is important, and we proposed and DelDOT agreed that the entrance will have a dedicated left turn lane along 7th Street for traffic turning into the site as a left turn. And we will also have a dedicated right turn lane along 7th Street for traffic to turn into the site. So it separates those turning movements into the entrance versus the through traffic on Route 9 to be able to travel. We'll also have the shared use path that you've seen, in the renderings and the site plans. That's required by DelDOT. It's a 10-foot path. They require a 5-foot buffer, and will be required to stripe in a dedicated bike lane between, where our right turn lane. So there's a consistent path for both pedestrians and bicyclists. And from there, the other improvements are, general frontage improvements, making sure that the frontage of this property meets all of DelDOT standards for the roadway conditions. And so that's the conclusion of the traffic study process. So we are 100% complete with that from the DelDOT perspective. And the next step is the entrance plan preparation, which is the detailed design. So that is still yet to come, but that recommendation letter from DelDOT in their review of the traffic study sets all the elements that are included in the entrance plan. So that process has concluded. So with that, maybe we can cover the flood warning signage.
Next slide, please.
That we are
Sorry,
proposing.
Mr. Zerr has a question.
Sure.
You have to take into consideration the battery that's proposed to be built, also the apartments
So
near the garrison.
we had a number of committed developments that we needed to incorporate, and
It has to do with timing. When they were, so Nicole, walk you through the ones that did meet the timing cutoff that we included.
And DelDOT doesn't just look at city boundaries. There were some areas of the county that were included because it's all about where the traffic is going, and traffic doesn't stop, of course, at a city or county boundary. So that's good for everyone in that, they're trying to be very comprehensive. So there was a development at 312 Carroll Street, which was some warehouse space that we had to include. There was the Christiana Care Logistics Center, also some warehousing space. There was the Waller Farm Warehouse Logistics Development that was included. The 650 Churchman's Road, which is also warehouse space. And last but not least was the Battery. So we did include it as well. So we heard, through the.
Chief, please.
Can I ask some questions, please?
Sure thing.
So the Battery is the one that's going in behind the current liquor store, right? What about the one that's been approved, but we really haven't heard much on it, and I don't know if you have any further information, because it was years ago that was right here across the street from me. That was like years ago.
I understand that to be who's the environmental consultant?
Unfortunately, he's the gentleman with.
Oh, that's right.
He's not here.
Landfill site under the supervision of Denrec, where behind the old parking lot there.
Yeah, I just vaguely recall, and I don't know if there's anyone in this room who might remember some townhouses that might be going in on, Mr. Ziegler.
Come on,
are you
Mr. Ziegler,
familiar?
come on.
I think I know what you're talking about.
Okay.
I think I know what you're talking about.
Cirillo, thank you.
Yeah, Mike Torella, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
And if you look at the aerial photograph, where you, there was an arrow, showed actually, he had already graded out that site. And it was for 28 or 26 or 28.
Yeah, I thought it was townhomes, but
And
that's.
that's why we aligned the entrance where we aligned the entrance, so it lined up with the entrance close to that's what Del Dot's plan.
So it does not appear that that made it in Del Dot's scope. Nicole, is that fair?
It did not. It does not have an active plan or, approvals to be constructed. And so it's not considered a committed development. They would have to come back and start all over. And I can say at that size, from a traffic generation perspective, it would be very low. And as Mark said, he's aligned his entrance point at a location, should that property develop across from us, we've done our part in locating our entrance at a location where they could tie into, which is good planning.
And I have a question about when these traffic studies were done. Were they done on the weekends, on Fridays, when this 7th Street right here becomes and
what time of year?
and what time of year, and she lives right up there on the corner, so she sees it more than I do.
So Del Dot has very specific rules and requirements for when we complete our traffic counts. So for a residential project, Del Dot requires weekday traffic counts, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, from 7 to 9 in the morning and from 4 to 6 in the afternoon. So that's what we have to do.
So it's missing some of the key traffic transport times.
So yes, I mean, there could be periods on the weekends, there could be periods in the summer where you may have, some level of additional traffic. But what Del Dot looks at is the impact from this specific development. And so if the area traffic volumes are higher, the impact from a project like this becomes even more diluted. So that's just the evaluation. It's really about the development.
If I may, they're looking at when, at least during the workday, AM and PM peak, people are most likely to be coming and going.
Taking kids to school, those types of typical trips, but.
The unfortunate part is that it's Fridays and during even a 4 to 6 period on a Friday is completely different than Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday.
Yeah,
The people cutting through perhaps to go to the beach and want to take Route 9.
Right.
Yes.
but it's not just like a few.
No.
Yeah.
It's
usually 4 to
completely
6.
wrapped up. And so, and I know that you're talking about diluted, but again, there's nearly 400 apartments going in there, and how much worse does that make it
Well, if you
during
think,
a period of time?
Yeah, if you-
And that is a concern that numerous residents have about the traffic. Traffic is not just here, it's throughout the city, and
Sure.
so.
and we did hear that, Mayor, from the Planning Commission, that's why they did condition their recommendation on a traffic study being completed per Del Dot standards. While I'm not encouraging this, the city certainly can regulate traffic in their code through traffic standards, but that does not presently exist in your current code.
So the grades for this, did they give grades on this? We've heard when they did the project off Lucan's Drive, there was a grade. And I
Yes.
know that D.
A through D.
Yeah, I know.
D
that
sounds
D-
bad, but it's not.
And it's like, we wouldn't have passed anything, but.
Right.
Yes, the city intersections that we were required to study within those parameters, and I acknowledge there could be periods that's the Del Dot rules. Within those periods for the cities within the intersections within the city that we were required to study, we do meet Del Dot's level of service grades, and that is level of service D as in dog or better with the project and these other developments assumed and general growth.
Yeah, I just find that like all of the intersections you mentioned aren't really anywhere near here. And I didn't hear anything of any intersections in the city. I didn't hear Washington.
So I don't think I mentioned the intersections. I mentioned projects like committed developments. So I'm happy
No,
to.
Carol.
That was developments. That was not studied intersections. That was going through and confirming what committed development plans we were required to include in terms of traffic growth. But the intersections that we had to study within the city were, I think, the ones you would expect: 7th Street and Washington Street, which is most proximate to the site. We also had to look at Seventh Street and South Street, which would be the next intersection down. And then we also had to go up and study 273 and Washington Street. And then DelDOT also had us study the intersection at 13 and 273, which of course is located in the county. They do acknowledge there's failures at 13 and 273. I think we all experience those. DelDOT has a project at that location. And so per their written of the very limited impact and addition of traffic that this development has on that intersection, that the applicant's not required to do anything additional. You know, DelDOT just needs to work through their project.
Cole, did they give you timing on that? I'm just curious.
I don't believe their letter speaks to timing on that one just yet. So I'm not sure if they have a confirmed timing for construction.
Thank you.
Yes, that's out there.
Nicole, could you speak to the McCormick Taylor letter, the planned bicycle and pedestrian facilities recommendations on page 14 of their July 3rd letter, where it says a 10-foot shared use path is requested? That paragraph, you know, since we were talking about crosswalks with the last applicant and pedestrian movements is a concern here.
You're speaking to item number 3D. They repeat themselves a lot in these letters, so I just want to make sure that
I'm looking at the July 3rd, 2024 letter, page 14.
Page 14. Okay.
Land, bicycle and pedestrian facilities. There's a lot of several requests. And I wanted to know what your client's position is on providing those.
And while she's digging that up, I'll just say when they request, we have to do it. They're actually not requests. I know,
Well-
but we have to, well, subject to right away.
Right, the requirements in the letter are to provide the shared use path along the site frontage.
Right.
And these letters are rather lengthy for those that aren't as familiar with them. They address their recommendations and requirements. And then there are several pages of additional narrative and evaluation. And sometimes those pages include requests. And Chris is speaking to a request not included in the requirements, but included later in the letter as a request. So under the reference that you cited, Chris, page, they are speaking to some planned bike and pedestrian facilities. So I want to speak specifically, 10-foot shared use path is requested along the 7th Street property frontage with a bicycle lane to be included between the through lane and the right turn lane. So I spoke to that. That actually did become a requirement, and that will be incorporated into our entrance plans. But they do go on and they talk about the developers also asked to repair or replace existing along the north side of West 7th Street from the site to South Street. The intersection of 7th Street and Washington Street, the developer is asked to refresh the existing faded marked crosswalks. You can see that pretty easily in an aerial view or of course driving through the intersection, and reconstruct existing curb ramps to eliminate ponding. And then a similar request at the intersection of 7th Street and South Street. The developers asked to refresh the existing faded marked crosswalk to cross West 7th Street. So those are all requests. At this stage, we haven't moved to the next step with DelDOT. But they are listed in the letter as requested and not included in the requirements.
And board members, I can just say based on 20 years of working with DelDOT, unless we have to acquire right away, they will expect us to do that as a condition of our entrance permit. In other words, they don't want to impose a condition on us that requires us to purchase somebody's land who's not willing to sell. So they'll say request, but ultimately if the right of way is there, where I think everything you just described, it is because it's existing. they will expect us, in my experience, to.
Well, if you want this property to look decent, you're gonna have to.
Yes.
replace it.
Sure.
agree.
And what they,
There's no doubt, because it's
Right.
elevated and it's.
right, and one of the reasons why they write their letters this way, you can imagine, and I'm sure you've experienced at the city, a project goes through this process with DelDOT in the city, and then maybe a project sits for a period of time. And maybe at the time when they first issued this letter, all this stuff looked fine, but the project doesn't get built and 5 years later it needs work. So they don't want to miss those opportunities. So what typically happens is when we go to the entrance plan design phase, DelDOT will go look at these things and they'll kind of narrow in on what actually needs to be done. I think we all acknowledge, and you've, I'm sure, seen the crosswalks that are faded, but DelDOT doesn't know exactly the condition of all the sidewalks yet. So they, that will be a process of looking at it as we continue down the line. But as Sean said, these are all items that are, proximate to the site and meaningful to the site, and they are within the existing right of way. And they're, relatively reasonable items to be addressed. So thanks, Chris.
Right,
Gonna go back to your.
flood,
To
the
the flood
flood,
signs.
the chief's
Yes.
request. He was looking for a solution. This was our proposed solution.
Yes. So immediately to our west on 7th Street or Route 9, you come into the Deemers Beach area with the Army Creek crossing. It's a known flooding area. DelDOT acknowledged it in their letter. They actually have a flood remediation project for that area. I'm sure the city's very familiar with. If those that may not be, they are going to be raising 9th Street in that area, in the vicinity on each approach of that Army Creek Bridge to reduce the settlement and the flooding that occurs in that area. So, that's something good to come. But we heard very clearly from the police chief that when this area floods, there's no warning for drivers until they get to the flooding. And then you can imagine, as a driver, how do you get turned around? There's people behind you trying to do the same thing. So it does become problematic. So we're very familiar. There's a lot of different tools that we can use, but one that is very effective and easy to maintain are the signs that we have proposed. We did show these to DelDOT. They will require DelDOT approval, but they have seen these. Excuse me. And what we are proposing is.
Oh, good, we're done.
We're done. It's over.
Thank you. Have a nice evening.
It's over as quickly as it
We can
started.
be done.
Okay.
We're back.
Set it to expire at 1 hour.
But I said depending on the questions.
So what we've proposed are solar powered flashing lights. We would propose them, and there's a map that follows, but we would propose one in each direction at a location where drivers could make a different choice prior to where the flooding is actually happening, so that they have an opportunity to turn off of that roadway and not get themselves into a situation where they're trying to turn around and there's a platoon of cars and it causes, issues for the area residents or, just that flooded area in general, an issue for emergency personnel. So these signs, this technology works pretty seamlessly now. Those signs would be able to be turned on and off by emergency personnel through a text. It's a very simple system. As I said, they would be solar powered, so there's no hardwire interconnect needed. So that gives us more flexibility on location. And essentially at this point, what we would propose, again, subject to DelDOT and certainly subject to further discussion with city emergency services, placing them at locations that would be prior to, as I mentioned, give drivers the ability to make a different choice. And I actually see we did revise this map. So we actually moved our proposed location for the westbound direction prior to Washington Street. Because as I mentioned, we're trying to give people the choice to turn. So if we have a sign here, we turn it on that tells people road flooded when flashing, people would be able to turn off of 7th Street to Washington Street and avoid that area entirely.
And just a footnote, Nicole, and I know Delta makes the final decision, but we'd also consider, what about folks coming down 141 and making a right? Perhaps a location here where both directions could see it. You know, I know you have to work with Delta, but just so the board has an idea, there's more thought to go into that process.
Yes, there are a variety of options, but that's our goal. And that's why, we would want to engage further in that discussion with city emergency services and also with Delta. We want to put them in a visible location. We want to put them in a very effective location. But ultimately, the goal is that people don't drive down here and not see the flooding until they get there.
Are those in line with what the chief has been talking to us about wanting digital signage, or are these acceptable for him?
I would have to confirm with him with what would be acceptable to him. This is something we've discussed, but nothing has been discussed.
Yes, and Mayor, good.
I think he's talking about a different sign. This is a new, different sort of thing. Signs he's talking about, to roll out.
The variable message signs, which you could use in conjunction with these. The benefit here is this is a sign that's going to sit out there and it's going to be ready to turn on instantly when the flooding is detected. So you may have other measures that you want to add to that, but it gives you that ability to turn something on immediately, very quickly, without additional deployment.
And Mayor, full disclosure, we have reached out, and normally the chief is very responsive, but we have reached out to circle back on this with him. We've not yet met with him in follow-up. But we will do that certainly during the site plan. We'll continue. I think we reached out about a week ago. We'll continue to effort that.
So I'm happy to answer any additional questions.
What about, well, I don't think this has to do with her. So I'm gonna ask you, can I ask them questions next? Okay, so on your property, can we go back to an overview of the property, please? Thank you so much. I don't know where we'll find that one. So on the corner of Larkin and 7th, there's a brick building that has the for sale sign and everything on it. So and there's a house back on Larkin. You're tearing those down.
Correct.
You don't see a way to recycle, for lack of a better word, that the brick building on the corner into anything. Years ago, I'll just say this, whether it makes a difference. Now, Liquid Alchemy looked at buying that brick building. Do you know who Liquid Alchemy is? They're a mead producer. And they had asked Eric Mayer about buying that building, he didn't sell it to them, because they wanted to put their brewery. It's not really a brewery because it's mead, but it's
Distillery.
a distillery type of thing. So, sorry. Just
we're not in the brewing business, I guess.
You're not, but it's just like instead of tearing something down all the time, it's.
Yeah, for our optimal layout to meet all the criteria that my professional due diligence very, thank you everybody, delineating kind of how we apply to that, you end up with, you leave that building, one, it's on the brink of, it's not the best condition, two, then you have setback requirements, you have all sorts of other stuff that just opens the door to be in non-compliance and eliminating other issues with the ordinances that we need to comply with.
Okay.
Okay. And if I may, it's a slide 48. I'm going to try to combine about 4 slides into one. As we're getting there, as all of you probably are aware, the city certainly has done some sea level rise analysis with the assistance of Chris's firm. And we have in the past used a dead allows us to look at their projections, which are only projections, they're not in the code. And so what we try to do whenever we do a new project is take a look at what would happen in the 5-foot scenario that is a 2050 scenario. Again, not regulated by your code, but we like to look at that. Because this site will be capped, we have to now under the new regs, as I understand it, add 2 feet of topsoil. And so when you add the 2 feet of topsoil, this is sort of the conclusion slide. I skipped over a bunch of others in your packet in the interest of time. You'll see that the blue stands for inundation with 5 foot sea level rise assumed. This relies on the DENREC website. Mr. Ziegler's firm put this together, but you can see even in this extreme hypothetical condition in 2050, we keep these buildings out of the projected 5 foot. Again, that's extreme scenario. It's not 100%. That is a worst case scenario that's been estimated by the feds at 2050, but we're out of it. As you know, majority of the city or a fair amount of the city is in it. So the good news is we kind of killed two birds with one stone with the capping. By elevating the site, we also address this potential concern in our future.
Just to clarify, Mr. Tucker, that's the sea level elevation.
That is correct.
That's not the floodplain elevation.
That is correct.
No, that's correct. That's the Delaware River high tide elevation 4 to 5. At 5 feet, that would put it at elevation of 9 to 10. We are required to create 18 inches of freeboard with a 100-year FEMA floodplain, which is, let's say, elevation 9, the highest. So we have to be at 10.5. By abiding by the FEMA floodplain regulations, we will be above any future impacts by the Delaware River rising.
And Mr. Ziegler, to Mr. Rogers' question, we also address in your plan the code requirement about being above the floodplain as well, correct?
Well, yeah, exactly. It will be 18 inches minimum for the floodplain.
Thank you. This might be a good time to invite my client up, if I could, just to have him talk about the brownfield situation, the current status of that, and perhaps speak to the email that he has on behalf of his consultant, who unfortunately couldn't be here this evening.
I need your name again, I'm sorry.
John Jaffe,
John Jaffe, raise your right hand.
right?
Do you swear the testimony you're about to give us the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do. Like Sean said, unfortunately, Doug Seavey from Landmark is our environmental engineer, and they at 3:50 something, he shot out an email that said, I have COVID, so I immediately called him and said, send someone else from your office, and he said, I got it at a company party, we all have COVID. I said, okay, good, so I mean, email, give you a little background, I've been working with him on some of this stuff, so I know not to be dangerous, so I'm not an environmental engineer, so I'll read the email summary of kind of what this was. This project had been around since 2009. So his email here is in 2009, Landmark collected 86 shallow soil samples, 79 deep soil samples, 15 groundwater samples, and 8 surface water samples. In 2024, to complement and confirm the prior sampling, Landmark collected 27 surface soil samples, 27 shallow soil samples, and 26 deep soil samples, 5 groundwater samples, and 4 surface water samples. So basically, we hired him and he'd already done a ton of environmental work here, and then he complemented that with more recent stuff to verify what we've done. That's all under the coordination with DENREC. The samples generally showed elevated levels of metals across the site, some small areas of PAHs, which is fuels. The risk assessment showed that the soil does pose a risk to residents on the site, and in order to prevent human health impacts, the site needs to be capped with 1 foot or more of soil to prevent long-term contact with the soil. The plan is consistent with the development plan to cap the site and raise it out of the floodplain. Which is why Sean just brought me up here. So we're actually proposing to put 2 feet, not 1 foot, because it helps raise it out of the floodplain. That complements the environmental remediation. And there has not been remediation of the site, as there's no need for targeted hotspot removal as a contamination in general across the entire site. So what I'm saying is you cap the whole site, there's no need to excavate any of this stuff. There's basically, in the world of environmental contamination, this site is actually very good. So you're just capping it, there's no gas emissions. Sometimes you can get some pretty significant viral impacts. It's a pretty simple capping, which brings it out of the floodplain.
Is not, of course, I drive by it, but I don't go up there. Isn't a lot of that up there concrete or asphalt or?
Some of it is, because there was an old building that was there that was previously demolished. So that's there and it was removed. But so
Mr. Jaffe, would that be removed as part of your development?
yeah, everything's.
But does that disturb the soil underneath? if you're removing
Yeah, then it capped on top.
and cap it again.
Yeah, so everything's graded out and the whole site gets capped off, and to the extent that that floor, old floor slab in the old warehouse, that's underneath the floodplain, we gotta raise that up.
Mr. Jaffe, can I put you to the bullet points that your consultant's going to testify to? Can you offer status, site conceptual model and sampling plan approved by Denrec? Have you been involved with that with him, or are you aware of
Sure,
that?
so that's the check I wrote here, which was the additional sampling, so some was done in 2009, and then he met Denrec out there and said, hey, double check it, so you went back and double checked it, some of the stuff came on better, so you have those hydrocarbons in the soil, actually over time, they break down. So he had some higher readings in 2009, they've since remediated themselves. Some of the metals and stuff take hundreds of years, but so that's the site conceptual model and sampling plan. So Denrec approved that. That's all been
Excuse me,
submitted.
quick question. You said 2009 and then it was just done again this year?
Correct. So it was done 2009, because the site has been looked at a couple times since then. It hasn't been redeveloped, and we're probably redeveloping it here. So in 2009 landmark, I think there was a church or something that might have been
Team
going
the
in there.
Greatness, I think, was looking at the
Yeah,
site.
so
and
we
then-
did it in conjunction with that. There's also at that time, there's some wetlands remediation that actually happened, that was actually done. So the wetlands in there were all raised up and replanted. That's it's an Army Corps permit that we also have to get in conjunction with it. That being said, that's the first line item there. So Denrec approved that plan, and they basically tell you what to do. Hey, we need to see this because you have an oversight body to make sure it's safe. So by the time we're through this whole process, he's done it. Everybody checks it, double checks it, and makes sure there's no contamination. Obviously important that we protect the public. So that's the first one. The site sampling risk assessment completed. So he did the sampling, looked at the risk associated with it. The brownfield development agreement executed that about 6 months ago. It's basically a deal that you make with Denrec. So we say, okay, here's our plan. We agree to hear about a plan. If we don't, it's a contractual obligation between us and Denrec. Then the remediation plan be updated and implemented per all Denrec standards, same thing. We give them all the sampling results. Our consultant says, hey, we think this is how we're gonna remediate it, which is the, not 1, but 2 feet of cap. They check, they say, these are environmental impacts. We agree with how you're remediating it. Thank you very much. And then they go out, they monitor it. We have to do inspections, make sure that we do everything pursuant to the plan that they told us we have to do.
First and last page, Mr. Jaffe?
There you go. Okay. This is Jeff Riley. He's one of our employees. Sign that agreement.
May 20th, 24th.
So, Sean, this is chicken and egg kind of thing, but from a timing standpoint, maybe it's because they're not here, you can't answer, but I'm trying to figure out when is that done in conjunction with the submission of the site plan? In other words, will you have your remediation plan done prior to the site plan coming in? How long does it take?
Right, that's a great question. I would, I'd ask Jeffrey to answer that because he'll be regulating the timing of the spending of the money, but I will say this, I've seen it done both during the site plan process, but also as a condition of any record plan approval. I've seen it done on the back end before BPs.
Right, well, you gotta get it before.
Right. So, but I'll, yeah.
That's why I asked the question.
Yes. So can you share
Yeah,
what your current plan
Yeah,
is?
we did another one. We did another project down in Rehoboth that had a similar capping issue, and it's 2 separate timelines. So you do have to go through, and then it's done in conjunction with the site work. So we won't start site work and taking a bank to finance it. There's other implications besides, there's a bunch of checks and balances there, but you have to, on a separate timeframe, get that approved in conjunction with all the entitlements here. And then you go ahead and implement it simultaneously with all the site work and get all the inspections when we're moving dirt.
We're talking about the site plan, I think you and I are not talking about the same thing. When you go to a planning commission at Newcastle.
Well, then he's right. It's just a condition of final. So you could bless it here and say, make sure it's safe for the public. And that's what happened down in Rehoboth too. They said, okay, because sometimes the timelines aren't concurrent, if you will. So if you just have one administrative item to complete, it could be approved subject to.
I think what Mr. Walton is saying, do you plan on doing it during the site plan approval? Because we do have to go back to the planning commission.
This is ongoing. Yeah, this is happening now. So, and I said, this has been greenlit for.
But the actual site work, Jeff, just so.
John.
The actual cleanup.
Yeah, the cleanup is done with the site plan building. So we're gonna.
You're
close on
gonna
the
have all
property.
final, here's my question, I'll try to
Sure.
put a sharper point. You're gonna have all final approvals before
Yes,
your site plan here in Newcastle is approved. In other words, you gotta go through the site plan approval. I'm just asking, I'm just trying to find out what.
Do you plan on having all DENREC approvals, including the last one, like on the
Before we
list,
record this
before
plan,
site plan
yes.
is?
Yeah, it should be a condition of the city's recreation of the plan. So you say, okay, we'll final approve it, subject,
And not before.
yeah, subject to DENREC signing off on it. Does that make sense?
I'm just trying to figure out when this happens.
Yeah, they all happen simultaneously, but like I said, if we have it ahead of time, then it's obviously not a requirement. If it doesn't happen, then that's, which is what you said a minute ago.
And Mr. Jaffe, just one last issue, there is some wetlands filling, is that correct? What's the
Yep.
status of that application?
It's, Doug's also doing that, so he's not here tonight again. It's another environmental issue. He does the wetlands as well as that, but that's in process. He met Army Corps out there. They love the condition. I have handwritten notes on that because it was a phone call, but he said, no problem to fill in the old wetlands. So basically they had old approvals and they put in a bunch of, and Mark might actually be better actually speaking on it, but they remediated a bunch of old wetlands that were there before my time, and those, the Army Corps came out, looked at those, they all look fantastic, and there's another part of that, where we're gonna be filling in above the floodplain, some of the wetlands that weren't filled in conjunction with that old permit. So we're revitalizing that old permit, the Army Corps has looked at it, they already met Doug out there, they said everything looks great, and we just have to submit that, and we're waiting for you to approve it.
In anticipation of Mr. Walton's next question, is that permit something you plan to have on hand as part of the site plan?
Same answer, you absolutely need it on hand before you can do the construction, and it's a separate timeline that happens with the entitlement process, but if this gets done quicker, then everything is subject to that getting done.
It's a question, not a command. Or you, so then are you okay if the board places a condition? that you have to have all of your wetlands approvals and your DENREC permits done prior to the recordation of the site plan?
Yes.
And one last question for me anyway. You're no stranger to the city. Can you tell the board a little bit about what you're currently doing in the city? I think they'd like to.
Sure. So Freedom Development is the land development arm of Gemcraft Homes. So we purchased a while ago from Cecil Bank, the for sale retirement community up there, Riverbends. We actually just reopened the clubhouse there 2 weeks ago, gave it over to the residents. Sales actually picked up in there a little bit, but we went in there and took that over from the bank and pumped some money in there, and we're in the process of selling that. So we are already in the city of Newcastle and had a bunch of fun work over there to
clean up.
Yeah, you can, enough said. So enjoyed working in the city. Everybody here is awesome. Mr. Bertram was fantastic in helping us with that. So we like being here, and as we were driving past this property again and again, so you know what? This property needs some love too. Let's see what.
Thank you, Mr. Jaffe. I have Mr. Gank available, who is a broker. If the board is interested in hearing about the commercial demand or not, I know we covered that, but he is available if you'd like to hear what's happening in the marketplace. Otherwise, we can move on. Okay, all right. Thought I'd give you the option. Thank you, Mr. Gank. I just didn't want to be presumptuous, and that's 50 slides. That's where I wanted to end. Thank you. Yes, sir.
I do have a question.
Yes.
Now, I know there's nothing planning for the commercial.
Yes, sir.
The buildings that are kind of slated to the end caps becoming a commercial, are those units gonna remain empty for that purpose, or is it gonna be used for the time being for residential use?
Thank you for that question. The commercial that we're proposing in the slide is what we propose to construct. And that was the 2,400 square feet approximately. That would be on one of the end caps.
Oh, no, what do you?
One of the end caps. Yes, yes. And that is because of the garrison and what we're seeing there.
So it's not gonna be the other end caps. I guess you guys will decide where would be the best.
Yeah, probably I had that question before we came in here, so probably I just make it the first floor unit on the right. So
Okay.
This one here, yeah, this one makes the most sense, and then coffee shop, some sort of supplemental retail, same thing, kind of like the deli, where it actually be successful.
But for the time being, it's gonna be used as a residential.
No,
Space.
No, we'd reserve it for commercial.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
So if you don't proceed with putting somebody in there on a commercial basis, it's just gonna be empty.
Yes,
It
yes.
would, but it doesn't look right, so we might, I mean, it's something that's code compliance, we'd have to maybe subsidize it, so you can, you can kind of make that successful if you really need to, it's a small enough space, you don't wanna pull in there and then see empty space, so I'd figure out how to do it, is the honest answer.
Or we could come back and seek an amendment to any approval you made with tonight, but I think Mr. Joffrey's pretty confident we can make something work there.
We'll be able to make something.
We'll build. Anything else? Any other questions for Mr. Patrick? Done?
I am done with one just final thing I'll offer, and that is the conditions that the planning commission put on their recommendation included the applicant submit for review of a traffic impact study to be submitted and reviewed by DelDOT and the city engineer prior to the Board of Adjustment consideration. You've heard from Nicole Klein in that regard. Adequate remediation of the site. You heard my client speak to that. The approval of the Den Rec plan ultimately, which Mr. Walton touched on, a possible condition, I think, that you may hear more from him on. And the possibility of affordable housing is considered. And you see there is a single bedroom, double bedroom. Certainly the materials that are getting plugged in have to be weighed in terms of affordability, but we have made the commitment follow the architectural rendering. So all those things will be factored in. So we're supposed to consider that, and we will continue to discuss that with the planning commission certainly as we move forward.
So, there was a letter on June 28th, plus comments regarding working with DTC and DART during your site plan process to incorporate their comment. I didn't hear anything about DART unless.
It's addressed in DelDOT's letter as well, so that will be a part of that entrance plan design process. There were some recommendations with respect to DART.
So see that on page 5. Yes, Mayor, you're absolutely correct.
Internal to the site as well. Consideration of.
It says the plus comment was a bus stop and pull off are needed on 7th Street Place before the entrance. The developer should coordinate with DART, as the mayor, I think, was referring, for the need of transit facilities both within DelDOT right away and internal to the site. So Ms. Klein, did the DelDOT weigh in on that second thought?
Yes, so their final recommendation in their July 2024 letter, which we referenced earlier, speaks to coordinate the site plan development with DTC to determine what transit facilities will be needed within the DelDOT right of way or internal to the site to accommodate future service requests. So DART will be included in what happens next is a pre-submittal meeting, and that's to really talk about with DelDOT's design folks, the entrance plan design and these other elements. And DART will be included in that. Obviously, as we go through the traffic study and things are formalized, DART needs to see what the plan looks like now to be able to comment in more detail. So that will happen in this next phase in the pre-submittal process with DelDOT. Yeah.
As all of you may know, DART does fall under DelDOT now.
Yes.
So they will definitely be at the table.
And maybe it's not right here, and maybe that comes back with the site plan and everything else, but crash facilities.
Yes, certainly will be incorporated into the plan. If they're not already, Mr. Ziegler, are the dumpster locations shown yet?
And screening, yeah.
No, we haven't shown the dumpster locations at this point, but we will make sure when we show them that we can spray hit their dumpsters and maybe some internally hit garbage.
Yeah, and it's a good time too for me to point out that we're developer owner operators. So one of the things I like to stress to boards when I'm doing these entitlements is we're not here to do something and not own it. So we're gonna be here in this one for a long time. So to the extent you're talking about public transportation, things that really help, we're very interested in that sort of stuff. We want a good project because it's our intention to own it and keep it. Good members of the community have a good project here. So appreciate the.
Thank you all for your patience. Oh,
That deals with the secondary entrance.
Sure.
And I know you discussed you could do that. Would you have any objection to providing a secondary access if required by Goodwill Fire Company.
We have no objection to that. The only caveat I would ask you consider is that if for some reason, and I don't anticipate this, if for some reason DelDOT would not permit it on the entrance plans, that would be the only caveat. John, is that?
Yeah, that's a good catch. I don't see how they wouldn't, because you're
I
not
agree.
touching Larkin. You'll do the emergency exit off the emergency entrance, whatever spec they want to use, we'd use several of them. So you just talk to whatever your emergency personnel want to do. I think that's a good idea also. Absolutely.
I also sit on the Municipal Services Commission, and we just had a discussion about this, and the last meeting was EV chargers and the whole developing scenario about this. Are you putting some in here? Is this gonna be part of your site plan? It's, you know,
In the
considering.
interest of brevity, so we've built a bunch of these projects, and one of our regrets in some old projects is not anticipating having that need. So we're actually going back and we're looking at different companies that come back in and retrofit the stuff, kind of kicking ourselves for not having the foresight to
Right.
like, okay,
Well, now you
should have run
have foresight
conduit
then.
here and
Yeah.
done it. So yeah, it's a great amenity for people living there, and it's almost imperative to have. It's almost
Imperative
a necessity.
I never thought we really actually need it so much either, you know, 5 or 6. Now it's
Well,
like,
yeah, and it's a great observation. You think about it, if you have an electric vehicle, purely electric, you can't rent here if you don't have those spaces. You just eliminated
right.
perfectly good tenants for no reason whatsoever, except you didn't have the foresight to plan.
So if you're finished, I don't think we're gonna have anybody, but I'm gonna ask, does anyone have any public comment? Either for or against the application at this time? Last call, speak now, or forever hold your peace. I'm having no public comment, you get no rebuttal.
I want to say thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Now, we'll go to discussion, with the, board. I was looking for the right word, commission, council, board, I'll get to that, yeah.
I'm gonna let you guys get through, but I might have an easy way to do reasons in the record, which I'll tell you about after I hear the discussion.
Okay, all right, discussion. Anybody?
I think the area definitely needs it, and I think it's great, and I think the whole idea is beautiful, and housing is wonderful. I'm just absolutely concerned with the number of apartments and 9 with the one access in and out and the traffic. And I know, and I appreciate the traffic study. I think it's great. It's just that I'm thinking of it as even a resident. And as I was thinking about it, I had to stop because it was stressing me out, because I'm thinking of a Friday. And it might even be just during the summer, but still that's 3 to 4 months on a Friday trying to get home, living there, and they're not. I'm glad that there's the right lane that they can, when they get to that right lane, that they could turn in, but it just gets so very bad right there.
Am I allowed to comment as your discussion? Or
No, I'm kidding.
That's one of the, no, I appreciate the comment. That's one of the things when I.
Hold on.
Hold on.
Your discussion is at the discretion of the chair. You want to allow it?
I would like her to finish. and then-
Okay, sure.
So, that is actually, looking at everything and hearing everything, I think that it sounds great, and I think the area right there could absolutely use it. I think it's gonna make that area and the value of that area go up. I think it's beautiful. I just have that concern, and it scares me, especially with being very familiar with that corner, on how it's gonna impact my neighbors down the road.
And she has a direct view. I mean, she sits on the corner
Of South and Seventh.
South and Seventh and can look right down this road.
And
So-
it does get crazy, and we make it a joke, but truly, I am very thankful that I usually get home from work on a Friday at 3. so I can pour a glass of wine, sit on the side of my house and just watch the entertainment because it is insane. But it does scare me. Just wondering what that impact's gonna be already so bad.
And so we're very sensitive to that. So one of the things when I stressed before that I'm an owner operator is I'm gonna be around as property manager. So one of the things that I'm concerned about is the same thing that you guys are concerned about, which is I don't want to build a problem, right? So what I do when I task professionals like Nicole here is one of the best in the business is please don't give me a problem. So one, we have to make sure physically we can do what we're doing on the site, but other things is, okay, have DelDOT review this, make sure it's okay. And also in your professional opinion, one, of course, the emergency access, is this safe? Because if it's not safe, I'm not building it. And two, I don't want to have residents that are going to be sitting on their porches being, even angrier than you are now. So it's like, okay, what kind of impacts are we going to have here? And let's make sure, not that it's, a disturbance for existing people, but not have a problem for me, because who wants to rent from us when I just created a horrendous traffic problem? So that's one of the things that we're sensitive to on the planning side ourselves as owner managers. And that's one of the things that she's tasked with, which is looking at that. And sometimes it's difficult as a normal person, even like myself, when someone first explained some of the traffic impacts to me, I was like, I didn't know actually how to conceptualize it. It's like, okay, you have, for 100 houses, you have 60 trips an hour. And you're like, wow, that's 60 cars and it's so many. And they're like, wait a minute, that's one trip every minute. It's like, okay, well, if it's one a minute and I'm parked at the intersection, you're not gonna even notice the car. So you start looking at what the impacts are. My point in that analogy is just sometimes you look at the massing of these projects. That's why you have to hire Nicole. She sits there and she says, okay, we have math that tells you this is a problem. And that's her job. I'll let you do a better job.
And if it's okay, Mrs. Scarpetti, but you stopped exactly where I thought Nicole could be helpful, because it is natural to think, oh my gosh, a couple hundred, maybe 300, 350, they're all gonna show up at the same time, but Mr. Joffe's right. What happens, and I'll let Nicole explain this as a professional and a traffic engineer, they arrive over time. They never all arrive at once. And what we've seen post-COVID now is now you have people kind of more spread out when they leave work, when they don't leave work.
Or not leaving at all, working from home.
Yes, that too. One personal experience that I noted when I lived in North Wilmington, I had about 90 homes, not as many as this, but 90 homes around me, and there were two ways out of my community. And I would typically leave for work. This is pre-COVID at like 7 o'clock. Now it's more like 8:30. So I leave at 7 o'clock and between 7 and 8, which is rush hour. And I would come to a stop sign at the Ring Road around the Brandywine Town Center, or is where I would typically go in and out, or I would go out the Silverside Road. Now that I do this kind of work, I often wondered, well, where is the traffic coming out of a neighborhood? There wasn't one time in the 10 years I lived there, this is my personal experience, where I had a neighbor waiting behind me to leave in the morning at that stop sign. You would think you would with 90 homes, but it really does spread out. That's just a personal experience I like to share when your exact question comes up in meeting. I'll let Nicole, if I can, as a professional, tell you the way this stuff models.
Yes, so as both John and Sean mentioned, and I think as you experience as a driver, when you're pulling out of a very specific development, that's the experience. It may be a number of homes or a number of residential units or a certain size of commercial, particularly at an entrance like this, which there's not going to be a traffic signal or any reason for through traffic on 7th Street to stop. So we're not impacting them, but we are adding some traffic. But as we think about the residents, particularly leaving this site, because there is one entrance and they will have to stop and wait for the gaps in 7th Street traffic to get out. People don't all leave at the same time. And the projections that we are including in our traffic study currently don't account for COVID. So already we're being conservative because those studies of these sites haven't made it into the equations and the calculations that we do yet, because not enough time has passed yet. The way that we develop our trips that are generated by these developments that aren't built, well, how do we do that? Isn't it a guess? No, what we actually do as traffic engineers, as hundreds and probably thousands of very similar apartment developments that exist, we go out and count them. And we collect that data and it all goes into a national resource that tells us, okay, for a typical apartment project like this, where there's no public transit, where everybody has to have a personal vehicle, that's our peak. That's what we're assuming for this site. So we're not accounting for people working from home and the shift that has happened with the pandemic. We are not taking a credit for people who will use public transit. We are not taking a credit for people who, this is going to be a relatively walkable site in close relation to other things that these residents are going to want to go to. Maybe not their job, but some could be a job. Some could be just, walking down the street to the deli rather than getting in my car and going somewhere to eat. So our traffic study doesn't take any reductions for that. So it is conservative in that nature. Now, with respect to the summer traffic, I think we talked about that earlier. There definitely is increased traffic. If there's an incident, that would cause traffic to divert and want to use Route 9, there could be some additional traffic there. But again, we're not impacting that movement of traffic as the through vehicles with the way that this entrance will operate. But maybe on that Friday in the summer, a resident or two coming out of this development, they might have to wait a little bit longer than they typically would. But it isn't going to be an influx of 200 cars trying to get out of here in 15 minutes. That's just not the way that it will function. So
Hopefully that helps a little
The
bit.
mayor is a lot nicer than I am, so nevertheless.
I think it's just important, you come before the Board of Adjustment and you bring your team and all in favor of doing something. But there's no one on the other side who's bringing a team that says, maybe here's what should be done or changed or what should be done. So it's important for us to ask a lot of questions. So I'm looking for a lot of answers. There's things, I'm gonna let Max talk here in a moment because he summarizes very well for us. And there were some conditions.
Yeah, we can go through those, but I don't think we've given.
No, that's true. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Steve?
Good.
Oh, Mr. Ramos.
Yeah, I don't have any questions. I mean, they've given us a pretty good presentation. They answered a lot of the questions, the recommendations that you brought up as far as for the young people that may be living in that complex, or like a playground would probably be something to consider, since you already have a community center designated. So if you had something in the backyard, in the back of that, for like a playground for the young kids, it would be a good addition. That would be the only thing that I would want to add.
Are you putting up, I can't see it here, and again, this may be part of a future site plan that we don't actually have. Are you putting up fencing there back along so you can't access the railroad track, or is that even allowed?
That's all gonna be handled in the site plan. that
Okay,
kind of
all right.
stuff.
Okay.
Really, your call, right? The applicant has provided a lot of information. It's your call is generally the project you allow, do you allow a special exception that allows you to have apartments and commercial in this area? Mayor, if I may?
Yes, you may.
So there was a couple of conditions I asked Mr. Tucker about. I don't think that there was any objection to them. But if there is, I will take an objection at this as it goes through. So number one, that I'm gonna call it the DENRAC Brownfield program will be completed before the site plan, or the planning will be completed before the site plan is approved. And the addressing of the wetlands issues and approval thereon, that will be completed before the site plan can be approved. The third condition was that they would provide secondary access to emergency vehicles on the site plan if recommended by Goodwill, subject to the caveat, unless TDOT tells them no. That's a terrible condition, but that's what it is. Fourth, they will install the advanced warning system, which they represented in their application that they would provide. So I think those were the four conditions that I have. They don't meet exactly what I have written there. I was trying to take the testimony and trying to put them together, but that's functionally what I proposed, or what you might propose as a condition. If I could, there might be an easy way to state the reasons in the record on this one, and I'll tell you how to do that. There is a September 30th letter that was provided as of today, which addresses a lot of the factors that were presented up here. And you have a PowerPoint presentation. So if you didn't want to go through each of the factors individually, you'd say, for the reasons set forth in the PowerPoint presentation and the September 30th letter, I approve. That gives me all the standards that I need because it's already there. If you decide that you want to vote against it, you would have to state the reasons that or the factor that you didn't feel was met during the presentation today. So if you're good with the four conditions that I had, I don't know if anybody else has any other conditions that they want to discuss.
Well, we discussed DART and the EV chargers. That's all.
My view is that's really site.
Yeah.
Some of this is actually, some of what I'm saying is site plan. I just want to get, if you look at my conditions, they really deal with timing.
Right,
of when we're gonna have those, and that's why I asked the questions that I have. Chris, comfortable with my conditions?
Yes, we would have naturally picked up those conditions during the site plan process, but it doesn't hurt to
Right, so we
state
had,
them initially here.
so that would be, those are the four conditions that I had, so. So I think you ought to have a motion in the affirmative, and we can say, with the four conditions as outlined by the solicitor.
Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve?
Second.
A motion to approve for the four reasons outlined.
So can I ask you both to withdraw your motion and your second?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Motion to approve with the four conditions outlined by the solicitor.
So a motion to approve with the four conditions outlined by the
And
solicitor.
that would be the wetlands that get it done, get the thing stuff done.
As he said, that are in the September 30th letter.
No, don't worry about that.
Okay, well, you mentioned that here, so.
Right, don't worry about that right now.
Okay,
Four conditions, wetlands, right, wetlands, brownfields, right, secondary access and warning lights. As I identified them before.
I second it.
Well, you give the motion.
Well, I thought Valerie just did that.
Did you make a motion? Okay, you seconded.
I second.
Further discussion?
For discussion, I approved the special exemption based on the reasons outlined in the September 30th letter and the PowerPoint presentation given here. Period. Right.
I vote in the affirmative from the 9:30 letter and the PowerPoint.
And is that reasoning incorporated by reference into your?
Yes.
I vote in the affirmative, into the record in agreement, with the, September 30th letter and the PowerPoint that was presented by the applicant.
I vote in the affirmative, for the reasons set forth in the September 30th letter and the PowerPoint to be incorporated into the record.
The special exception passes. I'm gonna freely admit that I have not done one of these decisions on a special exception. So we're gonna say that it's not final. I don't know if this is even right, but we're gonna say that it's not final until I get you a written decision. And you'd have 30, and everybody would have 30 days to appeal it. So that gives the record, I'll endeavor to provide that as quickly as possible. Might be a few weeks. Okay?
Thank you, Mr. Wong.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you.
And
Right.
with that, you can entertain.
Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion second.
All in favor? Aye.
So we couldn't complain about that.
Okay,